Awesome. So, Neil, if you want to go ahead and give us your background, tell us more about yourself, your experience, as well as give us an overview about who MindPrint is, and the impact that our partnership will have on students across different age groups, different grades, different subjects.
So I'm delighted to be here, delighted to be working with vRealm. It's the stuff that we do, the data is great, the data is amazing, the insights are amazing, but it comes alive and it becomes, the impact is magnified almost indefinitely when you pair it with a great tutor and a great tutoring organization. My background is tutoring. I've been building tutoring companies for 30 odd years, and I've probably published, 10, 12 books on various standardized tests and trained thousands of tutors and built products and built companies. And one of the things that I've noticed over the years is that the actual act of one-on-one tutoring hasn't really changed that much. And as the guy at the top who's got to make sure that every client is satisfied and having an impact and every student sees progress, I've watched a lot of tutoring go on that looks today a lot like it looked, even if it's on Zoom, it looks today a lot like it looked 30 years ago when I started. And that is really smart people who care, who are sitting one-on-one with a student and trying to figure out what works for that student through some combination of trial and error or intuition. And to my complete amazement, what I found was that all of these things that we've been doing through guesses and hunches and trying to read the kid were suddenly knowable and measurable. And that, to me, just felt like the future. And suddenly I realized, wait a minute, I don't need to figure this out through guesswork. I actually have this tool that will give me an incredible rundown on who the student is, what his core strengths are, what are the things that I need to support, and I can know it on day one. And that's when I started really getting excited about MindPrint. So let me just sort of back up a little bit and just sort of lay the foundation. So the MindPrint is two things. First, it is the MindPrint assessment, and we didn't create the assessment. It actually came out of Penn Medicine with a grant from the NIH, and they set out to create for themselves what would go on to be the gold standard of online scalable cognitive assessment tests. And it is. Anyone doing large-scale cognitive studies, this is the go-to battery. It's used by NASA. All the astronauts take it on their way up to the space station. It really is it has become the standard in the industry. We have been adapting it specifically for use in education. So in the battery that we use, and the kids can do it on their own, they can do it online, they do it on their computer at home. We are measuring specifically the 10 cognitive skills most closely correlated to performance in school and performance on standardized tests. So when you have a student who is struggling with something academically, everybody agrees on the what. Right? Like I'm struggling with reading comp. What nobody knows yet is the why, and that's where we come in. Try to identify what is it that's driving that struggle, because at the end of the day, a kid calls up or a family calls a tutoring company and says, "Hey, I need help with algebra." It's not because they don't have enough algebra in their life and the kid wants more algebra, right? Like, said no kid ever. The problem is the kid is getting algebra. He's sitting in an algebra class in school and something isn't working. And we can't solve the algebra problem until we solve the what is it that's not working problem.
Yeah.
But that's where, in a one-on-one setting, that's where we as tutors add unique value. It's not teaching the kid algebra. They got a whole teacher who's amazing who's doing that.
Yeah.
It's figuring out what works for each individual student. That's why you do one-on-one in the first place.
And that's what hooked us, initially when we started talking with you guys. You and I had a couple conversations about the whole learning approach and about how students are learning in this classroom and why they seek tutoring. Why are they looking for, individualized support one-on-one? And for us, the most important thing is clarity, getting as much clarity as possible from the very beginning. So what we do impacts the students almost immediately, instead of spending, hours and hours trying to figure out the learning styles, trying to figure out what areas the student having trouble in and why they're having that issue. Like you said, it could be, there are several factors that can be the reason why the student is struggling. And then we can say that almost 95% we're sure that this student is going to find success in these sessions, because there's a starting point. There's something that they're starting with, and it's that cognitive assessment, that MindPrint profile.
That 95% is something that never gets talked about, and I wish that it was. So even the veteran tutors, the great tutors who've chosen this as a profession, fall in habits, right? Like, this is the way I like to present whatever this concept is. And when that works, it's great, and it probably does work for, let's say, 60% of the kids. But for the other 40% of the kids, they learn a little bit differently. And so what this does is allows you to get a heck of a lot closer to something that's going to work for 100% of the kids, because it's adjusting for each kid. I like to talk. I like to explain things, right? And when I sit down to tutor, I sit and I talk the kid through it, and I can explain it over and over again in hopefully a fun and an intuitive and an engaging way. And that's great for the kids who have very strong verbal reasoning. But for the kids who don't have strong verbal reasoning, and they have, let's say, stronger abstract reasoning, I'm a disaster, right? Like I could explain it all I want, but there's an easier way for that student. And unless I know to stop talking and start drawing, that's never going to come out.
With this, it's going to help not just a tutor conform their teaching style, but also, take in that component, that incredibly important component of how does the student learn, why they might be struggling in this, and then now they can deliver a different way of tutoring, deliver it in a way that, has almost immediate impact on the students' results. And, we've had a couple of our students try out the MindPrint assessment, and I tried it out myself. And besides the data that come with it, that whole alignment side and the strategies and the resources that get delivered based on my profile. So now I don't just have data that I look at. I also have resources that, vRealm tutors can utilize and help them in the sessions, help them provide resources for the students, maybe outside of the session.
It's, there's the old poker adage of play the player, not the cards, right?
Yeah.
It's about the kid sitting across from you, right? Like YouTube can do a pretty good job of explaining how to multiply fractions.
Exactly.
That you don't need a tutor for that, but you do need a tutor to figure out what works for the kid sitting across from you. And then the minute you know what the student's strengths are, and you take a strengths-based approach, leaning on the things that the student is already inherently better at, not only does everything get easier, but it gets a heck of a lot more fun.
Yeah,
right? We're not fighting the material. We're not fighting the process anymore. You're actually leaning on the stuff the kid's good at. You start scoring some wins. You get more buy-in, and the student's even more ready to take on bigger challenges, and you get a whole virtuous cycle, and things get better faster. As tutors, we're usually brought in to solve a very particular problem. Maybe it's algebra, maybe it's reading comp, maybe it's something else. But the ultimate expression of this is, how do you create a knowledgeable, self-directed learner that knows what he or she needs to be successful and has the tools to do it? And so, we might be there to solve a bad midterm grade in algebra, but ultimately what we're doing is teaching students how to be successful learners for themselves, which is going to have an impact, far beyond this one algebra grade that we are there to solve as tutors. And that's in a one-on-one setting. And then, Ali, you and I have talked about bringing this into a group setting where, you're right now, you've got kids who are grouped by age, you've got kids who are grouped by score. But what no one's really leveraged yet, and what you now have the ability to do, is group them by learning style. And I know that when I've worked with small groups, sometimes they can just be miserably inefficient because I have less time, and whether it's a group of 3 or a group of 50, I've got a group like some of the kids are lost. The high scoring kids are bored, and I got to teach to the middle, where I still got to differentiate for everyone in the room. But if I have a group of kids who are all learning in the same way, and I can present the material in the same way according to their core strengths, I can get some of the benefits that normally you only get in a one-on-one setting, and I can get those benefits when I've got 3 or 5 in the group just as well. And that's an old game changer.
Our marketers, they're grouped together as their roles. And we have people that are really good in content creation. We have people that are really good in like video editing. We have people that are really good in marketing strategies. So we have a marketing team, but they're also grouped by roles. And you talk to any other company, name any of like one of the largest companies in the United States, like Boeing, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, all these large conglomerate of engineers, they do that grouping of roles, and they try to find the most possible, best possible, efficient way of grouping their team members to improve their overall approach and productivity. We do that on the faucet of almost everything within our life, except, and you alluded to it earlier in the conversation when you were introducing yourself, is that the way we tutored like 20, 50 years ago and the way we teachers taught 20, 50 years ago is the same exact way it is now. Group in the same way, where the medium might have changed, right? Instead of going to a classroom, maybe you do it sometimes over Zoom. The tutoring approach being, a tutor comes to your house, now they do it over Zoom, but the approach is the same.
People learn differently. Like all our brains are different, and we all have a unique combination of stronger skills and weaker skills. And the goal and the magic of a one-on-one setting is that you can figure out who's the kid sitting across from you and put the information in ways that make it easier for that student, and then teach that student how to do that for him or herself, right? And then we're just there to solve the algebra problem, but what we've really done is prepared this kid to go out on his own, go off to college, and be a successful learner, even when there isn't a tutor there, and there isn't a parent there, and there isn't a homeroom teacher there. A lot of people, they're very familiar with summative assessments and achievement tests, and so they're expecting something that has some math and some reading comp and a bubble sheet, and this is not that at all. It doesn't look like anything the students have done before. It's not redundant with any other test that they've taken. It looks like a bunch of brain games, like a bunch of brain teasers. We're looking specifically at complex reasoning, long-term retention, executive functions, and then speed and processing. It takes about an hour. But the nice thing about it is, with an achievement test, you test the kid in the beginning of the year, you give them a semester of algebra, and then you test them again mid-year, and you test them again at the end of the year. You got a whole bunch of tests going on to see what the kids learn. This is not that. This is looking at what that student's inherent skill set is. So you really only need to do it once every, you don't even need to do it every year, every other year at most. And then it's all about teaching that student to lean on his or her strengths. And so, but here's where it can have long-term ramifications, and sometimes it gets tragic, where you might have kids who have, let's say, weaker visual memory, and they struggle with math early on because they're not retaining some of those things that are nonverbal. And then they start to believe that they're bad at math. And that's not true. And it doesn't have to be that way. But then as they sort of get up through high school, they continue to tell themselves, I'm bad at math, I'm bad at math. And the minute they believe that, it instantaneously becomes true because they stop engaging with the math product. They start to, like, they go to survival mode. Let me just get through this thing without getting hurt too badly. Right. As opposed to really embracing the material and getting into it. And then they end up sometimes going through life saying, I bring up this example because that was me. That was me. I told myself all through high school, I'm terrible at math. I picked a college that didn't force me to take math. And then what did I do 2 years after college? I became an SAT math tutor. And I only did it because they forced me to do it. And then I suddenly realized, oh, wait a minute. I actually really like this. This is really fun. But somewhere along the line, I convinced myself that I was bad at math. And so I avoided it. And it really didn't have to be that way. And so sometimes that sort of misalignment or failure to approach the material in the way that matches the student can have these unexpected and unfortunate long-term consequences. And sometimes as tutors, the first thing we have to do is undo some of that stuff.
And that carries over into high school and to when now they're deciding a major, when they enter a workforce. So there's a lot of work happening in a lot of different industries to try and like engage some of these younger girls in middle school and get them and figure out how to get them more engaged in STEM fields and cultivate that interest into their high school career and later on into college. It's very cool.
Sometimes when you get these social constructs, sometimes, data is the sunlight that is the best antiseptic. And that's a big part of what we do is let's start with objective data so that we actually know who is this student and we don't have to guess and we don't find ourselves making assumptions about the student sitting across from me. And we all make assumptions, right?
Absolutely.
Sometimes knowingly and sometimes we're unaware of the assumptions we're making. But when you have the actual data, it changes the whole conversation.
Neil, can you tell us a little bit more about what the assessment is actually based on? You've alluded to it not being owned, but like the actual assessment itself is not developed by MindPrint, but it was developed by the NIH. Can you give us a little bit more information on that, how it's been used in areas other than education?
It is based on what is, in fact, a fairly well-defined canon of cognitive science. And that cognitive science has evolved tremendously over the last 20 years. If anyone knows who Daniel Kahneman is, the thinking fast and slow guy, one of his proteges actually ran the team that developed our battery. And it's like you'll see that our data actually correlates quite closely with other well-known cognitive evaluations, whether you're looking at the WISC or the Woodcock-Johnson or the CogX, because we are over time developing an ever better understanding of how the brain works and how people actually learn. Right. So it comes out of that canon of understanding. What we've done is, and what our assessment does, is found a very efficient way to measure these things. And then it's based on this massive data set of normative data. And what that means is thousands and thousands of kids who have all taken the assessment that allow us to say objectively, your student is fast as compared to his or her peers, or slower as compared to his or her peers. And that normative piece is crucial, because like, what does fast or slow really mean? But there's actually an objective answer to that question, and the importance of having objective data rather than something based on observation alone is that it is normed. And we really can look at a kid as compared to their peers and talk about, and this is what I find that a lot of parents have this question, this notion of what's age appropriate, right? So my student is a reader or doesn't like to read or is struggling with math or is constantly forgetting his book bag. And how much of that is absolutely normal and age appropriate for a 10, 12-year-old boy to forget his book bag or have it look like a disaster because there's a whole bunch of stuff shoved in the bottom and no one can find anything? Or how much is actually not normal and a little bit more extreme and indicates either an extreme strength or an extreme weakness, and therefore needs some strategies to ensure that whatever that skill is, if it's on the weaker end, it doesn't prevent learning from occurring.
So the science behind it is based on like actual cognitive science, and it's been developed and enhanced to be more suitable to the K through 12 education, let's say.
Yeah, and look, if you go on our website, there's like hundreds. If you want some really scintillating reading, there are hundreds of papers of all the studies that have been run on the pen battery. Because in truth, I don't want the cognitive skills that we're measuring to be a distraction. What really matters is, what are we going to do? How are we going to use this information to help the kids sitting across from me? So we have a couple of different reports that are presenting the data to tutors and to parents and to educators in a way that's hopefully intuitive and accessible. But for me, the most powerful is the curated strategies. And so we've taken this giant set of evidence-based learning strategies, not stuff that we came up with, but stuff that has been studied and published on that we know works, but we've correlated it to the cognitive skills that we're measuring. And then we have a report that says that here are you can't give a kid 500 plus strategies, right? So let's pick the few that matter, first and foremost, based on who's the student as a learner, but then also based on what's the learning objective. So there are some strategies around memorizing. There are strategies around time management. There are strategies around task initiation and organization. There are strategies around solving challenging math problems, reading challenging texts. And the goal is what we like to say, right strategy, right kid, right time. Can't give a kid 5 strategies. That's like giving him 500. Pick the one that matters. And what I find is that a lot of tutors who have, in fact, if you go to most tutoring companies, they put you through a training and they say, here's our pedagogy, here's the way you should be teaching this. And the problem with that is, let's say you've got a kid who's struggling with reading comprehension. Maybe it's a verbal reasoning problem. Kid reads it, but just can't get it to snap into focus. If it's a verbal reasoning problem, I need verbal reasoning strategies to solve that problem. But maybe it's not a verbal reasoning problem. Maybe it's a working memory problem. Kid has no trouble understanding what he's reading, but by the time he gets to the 3rd paragraph, he's forgotten the 1st paragraph, and by the time he gets to the questions, he's forgotten what was in the passage. That's a working memory problem, and for that, I need working memory strategies. Now, all I know is that kids struggling with reading, if I start bringing memory strategies to a reasoning problem, however good those strategies are, I'm going to lose that kid. Because the strategies I'm bringing, even though they're good strategies, they're not the right strategy for that student. And if it's not making the student's life easier, if they're not seeing success, if it's not working, they're going to stop doing it. If someone tried to make me underline and annotate every paragraph that I read, however powerful that can be for some students, I'm just going to ignore them. Not because it's a bad strategy, but because it's not what I need when I'm struggling with a challenging text. Right? So right strategy, right kid, right time. And the opposite of that is if wrong strategy, however well-intentioned, means that relationship ultimately is not going to be successful.
Absolutely. That's very important.
It's
Three items that are very crucial to whether this tutoring, let's say, tutoring journey for that specific student ultimately, is successful, like you said, or not.
That's why it's so exciting to be paired up with you guys, because you now have, I mean, it's like all the other tutoring companies out there are walking around with a magnifying glass, and you guys have an electron microscope, right? Like, you guys actually now have a tool that no one else is using that you can use to ensure that not 60% of your programs are successful, but something a heck of a lot closer to 100%.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we have two more questions before we run out of time. I know we're already over time with you, but I have two more questions. The first one is, how many school districts, counties have implemented the MindPrint assessment? And can you tell me about some of the results that came out because of this implementation?
Yeah, so we're still pretty new, but schools have taken to it immediately. So I think in the last couple of years we've gone from about 50 schools to up over 300 at this point. And those are schools, school districts, private, public, charter. And we are now actually on our second National Science Foundation grant to look at the efficacy of this in a number of different school settings. So we've got one study right now looking at large urban school districts and the long-term impact on learning and outcomes when you use this data. So right now in schools, the vast majority of the research goes towards content. Like, what's the kid learning, right? And rightly so. I'm in math class, I'm in English class, I'm in history class. If that's not working, a little bit of time gets spent on the social, emotional, and the why isn't working. But when it comes to cognitive, almost nobody gets it. Not because they don't want to do it, it just was never possible before. The only people who get it are either people who need to qualify for a gifted and talented program, it's the tails, people at the very high end, or the kids who are a year or two behind grade level and they need to qualify for an IEP of some kind, right? Let's call that 2%. Anyone else in the middle, it doesn't come up. But when you look at what actually drives the variability of outcomes in schools, better than 50% of the variability in outcomes. And what that means is two kids sitting in the same class with the same teacher and the same materials, one kid's struggling, one kid is thriving. The difference is cognitive. And yet the cognitive evaluation, it's the only people, like a neuropsych battery takes 4 days and in most places costs anywhere from $4,000 up to $8,000. And that's assuming you can get on someone's schedule. And then it's, usually this is only a special ed, thing for students who are neurodivergent in some way. But why not have this information available for every kid? And again, it's not that nobody wanted to do it before. It just was never possible before. But now that there's actually an easy, scalable, accessible way to do it, we can actually start adapting to each student because we now know.
We're taking as much as we can from the benefits of the MindPrint assessment.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Last question, not related to the assessment itself, but what aspects of the vRealm MindPrint partnerships are you most excited about?
I want to prove this model. I want to get it in front of more kids, and I want to show the world of the power of our insights in the hands of gifted tutors and people who are committed to not selling a brand or a pedagogy or a methodology, but actually committed to helping each and every kid. And like, let's go do that and start solving some problems for as many kids as we can get in front of. That's what I'm excited about.
That's what's driving us, and that's what we're excited about as well. All right. Well, any last thoughts? Any last questions, AJ?
One thing I should mention, by the way, is the assessment itself. Like, no math, no reading comp, no bubble sheets. It doesn't hurt. It's actually kind of fun. Like, nobody rolls out of bed in the morning excited to take on cognitive assessment, right? It's like, I want to go to the dentist, like just, But once the kids do it, number one, they're super intrigued. They really want to know, what does this say about me? And we have now done tens of thousands of kids, and I've yet to have a single one, student or parent or tutor, who regretted having done it. Like, once they've done it, the benefits and the value is absolutely self-evident. But people get nervous because they don't know what it is, and it feels like a big test or something. It's not. It's brain games. It's kind of fun, and they're really happy that they've done it.
Games, absolutely. Like I said, I've done the assessment myself. I love the results.
It didn't hurt.
And
you didn't run away screaming.
Like, you see a lot of people taking those personality tests. You see it on Facebook or on other social media channels where they're trying to learn more about themselves. And the way I explain it, it's like, this is basically it, but actually backed by neuroscience and actual evidence.
Yeah.
It's not
a series. Yeah. Like, what Harry Potter house are you? You're like, no, this is not a sorting hat. This is actual cognitive science. This is a real thing.
Exactly.